students. Today we are going to study class 12 political science chapter 2, that is End of Bipolarity. Before starting the chapter, let us first understand that what does bipolarity means. Your chapter 1 talks about Cold War era and the very existence of two superpowers or power blocks in contemporary world politics in that era, namely USA and USSR. And this very existence of two superpowers having two ideology, namely capitalism and socialism, is known as the existence of bipolarity in global politics. In this particular chapter, we are going to understand now that why this bipolarity ended up. The first topic of this particular chapter is what is Socialist Soviet system. Socialist Soviet system is the system and the alliance of the 15 republics which were a part of USSR. The uniqueness of the Soviet system was that these 15 republics were totally and only in support of the ideology of socialism. The ideology of socialism mainly talks about the rights of the poor working class, which was explained to you all in details in your class 11 political science book. You are known to this term called socialism. Again, it is also one another condition of socialist Soviet system was that one has to strictly follow the Warsaw Pact. Warsaw Pact was a military pact which was been signed by all the 15 republics of USSR. So in short, the understanding of socialist Soviet system means all the 15 republics which were a part of the Warsaw Pact, as well as they strictly and only they are supposed to follow the socialist or socialism as their ideology. Now let us progress into the chapter. The next part of the chapter talks about the disintegration, the reasons behind the disintegration of USSR. The full form of USSR is Union of Soviet Socialist Republic. It came into existence in the year 1922. So, this particular power bloc was equally powerful like USA during the Cold War era. Now let us see the reasons behind of the decline or the downfall of USSR. Number one reason, which is known in the global world, is the introduction of two reforms by their last political leader, that is Mikhail Gorbachev, coming up with two reforms. Number one, Glasnost, which means transparent democracy, and Perestroika, which implied restructuring of political structures. And it has been said that this introduction of transparent democracy and restructuring the political structure of USSR is the first important reason of its decline. Number two, it has been said that at that point of time, like for example in 1947, and in that whole era, many of the third world developing countries in Asia, Africa and Latin America, they started demanding sovereignty, and nationalist movement started, and it greatly influenced these 15 republics of USSR. And this trend of demanding rights from the colonial leaders in the third world countries had also greatly influenced these 15 republics of USSR, and it is called to be the second reason of its downfall. Number 3, it has been said that these 15 republics were surely following the ideology of socialism, and it was surely talking about following the military pact of Warsaw. They were together, no doubt. From 1922 till 1991, it was together. But with the gradual passage of time, they realized that although our ideology is same, but all these 15 republics, they had their own history, they have their own culture, they have their own difference of the geographical land, they have their own customs, etc., etc. And this difference of their own history, difference in their understanding, is also regarded to be the third reason of the decline of USSR. The fourth reason of the decline was said that it has been said that in that period there was the conflict and protest also started, not only against the colonial rulers in the third world developing countries, but also there were protests emerging for different reasons in Central Asia part, so that those protests also had a great impact in this disintegration of USSR. And the final point, number 5 point, which brought the disintegration, is said that even the leaders, Soviet leaders, were not united. And this lack of unification among the Soviet leaders is also regarded to be a reason, a cause, the final cause of its downfall. So I hope you understood these first 5 points. Now let us understand, out of this 5 points, this particular chapter mainly focuses on the first point, that is Perestroika, Glasnost, and the last leader, that is Mikhail Gorbachev. So let us shift into the next topic, that is, how was Mikhail Gorbachev regarded to be responsible for its downfall of USSR, and why Mikhail Gorbachev actually thought of bringing two reforms. So, as I have already mentioned once, I am going to repeat it again. Mikhail Gorbachev was the last Secretary General of USSR, the last leader, Soviet leader, who thought that Soviet Union was one dominated, one political party dominated country. It was been dominated by only one party, that is the Communist Party. It had only one ideology, that is Soviet ideology, and the country is to run only on the basis of the political leaders, whatever they say. So thereby it was been realized by that Gorbachev that so he thought of introducing reforms. He saw that many of the countries were introducing democracy, transparent democracy, giving rights to people, allowing people to speak, allowing people to share their views, were helping other countries to develop. So it made Gorbachev to come up with these two reforms, and which he named to be as Glasnost. Glasnost means transparent democracy, and Perestroika means introducing democracy and to bring change in the political structure, because they were totally dependent on socialist ideology. So accordingly, he, thinking of the betterment of the country, thinking of the welfare of the people, thinking of that, if he introduces democracy in a very large way, in an enhanced way, like all the other countries at that period was doing, so he thought that it will be helpful for Soviet Union not to be only mm, to be, not to be only strict with only with one ideology and turn to be alone slowly and slowly. He did not wanted to create a kind of isolation for Soviet Union. So accordingly, he introduced democracy. However, this and the very sudden introduction of democracy, transparent democracy, and sudden introduction and change in the political structure, it affected the whole bureaucratic structure of Soviet Union. It affected the political life, it affected the social life of the people, because even common people were not that similar, were not that familiar, were not that familiar with the concept of democracy at that point of time, and they were habituated into socialism, habituated into the dominance of one party system. So people were also not taking it positively the way, or taking it the way that Gorbachev has introduced something, it will be benefited for them. Instead it turned to be a wrong ideology, a wrong reform, a you know it turned to be a failure in Soviet Union. And this failure of you know Perestroika and Glasnost is regarded to be as a one major reason behind the downfall of USSR. As I have been, informing you, telling you again and again that USSR as a country was totally dependent on the Communist Party and their Soviet leaders. So when democracy was being introduced for, of, and by the people for their benefit, people on the other hand, they started thinking that it was not for their benefit. Instead the Soviet leaders were uh, you know lacking, were lacking behind, were a failure to help the people took it in the other way. So when people did not support it, people did not like the bureaucratic system, couldn't understand what Gorbachev wants us to bring. So this whole socio-political cultural aspect of Soviet Union, totally it got disturbed. And this disturbance has rightly said, is rightly been said to bring a kind of a change, a kind of you can say a kind of total destruction of the whole system, and it led to the end of USSR as a superpower by 25th December 1991, and thereby, as Gorbachev was the last leader, he is been regarded in the Soviet history to end up the very popular ideology of socialism in USSR. Now let us understand about shock therapy. This is one of the topic which has been uh, which is there in in your chapter 2. mm, After the shock therapy we will try to understand about the outcome of the consequences of the Soviet Union. I am talking about shock therapy in between because it is also related to Soviet Union before its introduction. So I'm just going to talk about shock therapy before we know the consequences of the disintegration of USSR. Shock therapy is also a very simple concept. Shock therapy implies the introduction or the coming up of alternative powers in the post Cold War era. Along with USSR as the sole superpower, we also came to know about